In 1325, two of the most powerful cities in medieval Italy went to war. Thousands of soldiers, real weapons, real casualties. A real battle that changed the political map of an entire region. And it all started because someone stole a bucket. Not a bucket full of gold, not a bucket hiding a secret, not a bucket with any strategic or political significance whatsoever. Just a bucket from a well, made of oak. Thousands of men. One battle. Hundreds dead. All because nobody could agree on who owned a piece of wood. This is the story of the War of the Oaken Bucket, and it is one of the most gloriously absurd events in human history. To understand how a bucket starts a war, you first need to understand medieval Italy, because medieval Italy was not one country. It was dozens of rival city-states, each one its own government, its own army, its own economy, its own grudges. They competed for trade routes, territory, political influence, and occasionally just the satisfaction of making their neighbor miserable. Bologna and Modena were neighbors, close enough to share a border, close enough to share a history, and close enough to have developed a deep and genuine hatred for each other over generations. That their rivalry wasn't just personal, it was ideological. Medieval Italy was divided into two massive political factions that had been at war with each other for over a century. The Guelphs supported the Pope. They believed the Catholic Church should be the supreme authority in Europe, above kings, above emperors, above everyone. The Ghibellines supported the Holy Roman Emperor. They believed secular political power should reign supreme, not the Church. These two sides had been fighting, scheming, assassinating, and backstabbing each other for generations. Cities switched sides. Families were torn apart. Entire regions were consumed by the conflict. Bologna was Guelph, loyal to the Pope. Modena was Ghibelline, loyal to the Emperor. By 1325, these two cities had been ideological enemies for so long that almost nobody alive could remember a time when they weren't. The tension was already at breaking point. All it needed was a spark. In 1325, a group of Modenese soldiers crossed into Bolognese territory. They found a well, and attached to that well was an ordinary oak bucket. Nobody agrees exactly why they took it. Some sources say it was a deliberate act of provocation, a calculated insult designed to humiliate Bologna. Some say it was spontaneous opportunism, soldiers being soldiers, taking something just because they could. Some say they were drunk. Whatever the reason, they took the bucket, crossed back over the border, and brought it home to Modena. Bologna noticed immediately. They sent a formal demand for the bucket's return. Modena said no. Bologna sent another demand, more formal this time, more insistent. Modena said no again. Bologna issued an ultimatum: return the bucket or face the consequences. Modena laughed at it. And just like that, over a piece of wood that had been sitting next to a well, two of the most powerful cities in medieval Italy were on a collision course. But remember, it was never really about the bucket. The bucket was just the thing that finally made the needle snap. Bologna decided that if Modena wanted a fight, Bologna would give them one. They assembled an army of somewhere between 30,000 and 32,000 soldiers, one of the largest military forces ever assembled in medieval Italy. Modena could muster around 7,000. On paper, this was not a war. It was an execution. Bologna outnumbered Modena more than 4-1. Their generals were confident. Their soldiers were ready. The bucket would be coming home. On November 15th, 1325, the two armies met at a place called Zappolino, a small village between the two cities. What happened next, nobody expected. Modena won. Not barely, not by a lucky stroke, comprehensively, decisively, humiliatingly. Bologna's massive army was routed in less than an hour. Hundreds of Bolognese soldiers were killed. Thousands were taken prisoner. It was one of the most embarrassing military defeats in Italian history. An army of 30,000 beaten by an army of 7,000 in under 60 minutes. Over a bucket. Modena's soldiers marched home victorious, and they brought the bucket with them. Bologna tried again to negotiate its return, offered terms, made concessions. Modena refused. Again. The bucket was placed in the Ghirlandaio Tower, Modena's most famous landmark, as a permanent trophy of their victory. A symbol of everything. Modenese pride. Bolognese humiliation. The absurdity of human conflict. And here's the part of this story that genuinely stops me every time I think about it. The bucket is still there. Right now. Today. In the Ghirlandaio Tower in Modena, Italy, you can walk in and look at the bucket that started a war. It has been sitting in that tower for nearly 700 years. The soldiers are gone. The generals are gone. The Guelphs and Ghibellines are gone. The entire political system that caused the war has been gone for centuries. The bucket remains. The battle became so famous that nearly 300 years after it happened, in 1622, an Italian poet named Alessandro Tassoni wrote an entire epic poem about it. The poem is called La Secchia Rapita, the Stolen Bucket. It is a mock-heroic epic, which means it takes the most ridiculous possible subject matter, a stolen bucket, and treats it with the same grandeur, the same epic language, the same dramatic weight that Homer used to describe the Trojan War. Imagine someone writing the Iliad, but instead of the fall of Troy, it's about two cities arguing over a piece of wood. That is La Secchia Rapita. The poem became one of the most celebrated works in Italian literature. It was studied, praised, translated, and read across Europe for centuries. A war over a bucket produced one of the greatest poems in Italian history. The bucket outlasted the soldiers, the generals, the politicians, the entire conflict, and then inspired a masterpiece of literature 3 centuries after everyone involved was dead. Here's the thing about the bucket. It was never about the bucket. The bucket was a spark, and sparks only start fires when there's already fuel everywhere. Bologna and Modena had been enemies for generations before a single soldier touched that well. The ideology, the rivalry, the humiliations, the scores that needed settling, all of that was already there. The bucket just gave everyone permission to finally do what they'd been wanting to do for decades. This pattern repeats throughout history with uncomfortable regularity. World War I started because of an assassination, but the assassination didn't cause the war. Decades of imperial rivalry, military buildup, and alliance tensions caused the war. The assassination was just the bucket. The Trojan War, if we believe the ancient Greeks, started because of a woman, but it was really about trade routes, political power, and 10 years of built-up tension between civilizations. Helen of Troy was just the bucket. Almost every conflict in human history has a bucket, a moment so small and so absurd that future generations look back and ask, really? That's what started it? But the bucket is never really the cause. It's just the moment when everything that was already there finally tips over. Which makes you wonder, what buckets are sitting around right now, waiting? Somewhere in a tower in Modena, Italy, there is a bucket. It has survived 7 centuries, 2 world wars, the fall of empires, the rise and fall of entire political systems. It has outlasted every single person who ever cared about it. And it sits there quietly, completely indifferent to the chaos it caused, completely unaware that it started a war, inspired a poem, and is still being talked about 700 years later by people who weren't born yet when it was stolen from a well. History is strange. People are stranger. And sometimes the most important thing in the room is just a bucket. If you want more stories about the moments in history nobody taught you in school, follow Citium. New video every week. We'll see you in the next one.